So there's a poem written in 1915 by a World War I soldier, a British soldier, that harkens back to thousands of years of warfare. And this is one of my favorite poems. It's a poem that illustrates many values, and it's a harrowing, emotional poem, and it's quite short. And one of the things that I really love about this poem is also how it shows the value of a liberal education, an education in the canonical works of literature from Homer all the way down to modern era. And so what I want to do with you today, just to show some of this, I hope you'll get a little bit of this experience of the power of studying the liberal arts, studying the Homeric and the literary canon afterwards, and how that is not just a checkbox on your life that you could say I did that. Although that's one thing you can do if you read the canonical works of Western literature. But what it really provides is a connection of values to all these great and independent and individuals and bad thinkers and good thinkers, all kinds of people for thousands of years. And in our society today, we are tending to more and more lose connection to this. A connection does not mean you agree or believe in everything that they believed or anything, but it's just an understanding of who built the world we live in. So let's go. What I want to do today, if you've ever done a troubadour podcast poetry listening, you'll know this. I want to read the poem, and I want you to understand that you're not going to understand a lot of it. The words you'll understand, it's in English, it's in a modern English, so it's not like it's a lot of these and thous. You'll understand the basic idea, but there's going to be something you're probably missing, and there's stuff that you'll be not quite sure of. And then I'm going to give you some of the context, and I hope this context will be interesting and helpful. And I think it will also bring out a lot of the understanding of the poem and help you to see the power of poetry in general and the power of reading the canonical works. So this is a poem called "I Saw a Man This Morning" by the British soldier Patrick Shaw-Stewart. So I was going to read it. Just listen. Don't worry about the words too much. I saw a man this morning who did not wish to die. I ask and cannot answer, if otherwise wish I. Fair broke the day this morning against the Dardanelles. The breeze blew soft, the morn's cheeks were cold as cold seashells. But other shells are waiting across the Aegean Sea, shrapnel and high explosive, shells and hells for me. Oh, hell of ships and cities, hell of men like me, fatal second Helen, why must I follow thee? Achilles came to Troyland, and I to Chersonese. He turned from wrath to battle, and I from 3 days' peace. Was it so hard, Achilles, so very hard to die? Thou knewest and I know not, so much the happier I. I will go back this morning from Imbros over the sea. Stand in the trench, Achilles, flame-capped, and shout for me. I always kind of get chills when I hear that. Now, if you don't get chills, maybe it's because you haven't read the Iliad and you don't know what's actually being referred to. So this is a person who's read the Iliad. This is at a time when classical education was and always included the reading of the classics, which we don't do anymore. Many of you may not have read the classics, and this isn't your fault. This is the fault of a poor education. We have a really bad education system in the world today. I got a bad education as well. So the next thing I want to do is I actually want to read an excerpt of a translation that I did in iambic pentameter, but modern English verse of the Iliad. Not the whole Iliad, of course, but a section. Now, this section's going to be longer than what I just read. So sit back and listen. I hope you enjoy the reading. But I want to give you some context. So this is book 18 of the Iliad. So that's chapter 18. It's out of 24. So it's towards the end. And there's a couple of important things you need to understand about the story of the Iliad, and I'll just give them out real quickly. So Achilles is the greatest warrior of the Greeks. He has abandoned the Greeks because he was slighted by the leader of the Greek army, the Agamemnon, who took Achilles' prize of glory and honor that he was given to him because of Achilles conquering cities. And Agamemnon just kind of willy-nilly takes this person from Achilles, and Achilles says, I'm not fighting anymore. So the Greeks start really losing this war without Achilles. And then at one point, it gets so bad for the Greeks that the Trojan hero Hector is almost going to make it to the Greek ships. This is in Troy. So this is basically around the Aegean Sea, the Mediterranean. That's where the Dardanelles are. And, modern day. And what starts happening is this Greek expeditionary force that went to go fight and conquer Troy is now being threatened by the Trojans to have all their ships burned, and then they will all very likely die. So this is a big threat. So Achilles sends his best friend, a person that he really cares about, who he grew up with. Patroclus is the name, and he's a little older. He gives Patroclus his armor, and says, go out and make sure that the Trojans do not make it to the ships and push them back. But don't go all the way to Troy, because then bad things will happen. That's not for you to do. So Patroclus does a good job. He kills some Trojans. He pushes the Trojans back, but he doesn't listen to Achilles. He goes all the way to Troy, and then Patroclus is killed by Hector. There's fighting over the armor that's on Patroclus, which is Achilles' armor. And then Achilles hears about this by some gods, basically. And he's distraught and wants to go do something, but is unable to. And that's the passage I'm going to read to you. He's unable to because he's naked by armor, but then something happens. And I want you to listen to this, and hopefully you'll get it. And then this will bring it back to the Shaw poem. Here's a reading of Book 18 of the Iliad. The well-armed Greeks could not protect the fallen, and would have lost the body of Patroclus, the noble servant and best friend of Achilles. For Hector, like a burning flame in war, had reached him first and tried to drag him off, grasping with strength and shouting to the Trojans. But mighty Ajax lunged to push him back. Again they struck at him with force. And though bold Hector trusted in his strength, at times he charged into the heated fight, at times he roared and stood his ground, but still, despite their strikes, he would not back away. As shepherds cannot scare a starving lion from claiming prey, nor stop it as it feeds, so Hector, son of Priam, could not be driven away from Patroclus's lifeless form. He'd surely have dragged off the body and claimed glory, if swift-footed Iris had not, without the knowledge of Zeus or the gods, come flying down to Achilles from Olympus, sent as a message from the queen, fierce Hera. Iris stood beside Achilles and spoke fast. Rise up, Achilles, greatest of all men. Go save Patroclus, for because of him this dreadful battle rages by the ships. The Greeks and Trojans kill each other there, both fighting over Patroclus's dead form. The Trojans hope to drag him back to Troy, but Hector wants to cut his head and stick it on the spike of sharpened deadly spears. Oh, rise. Do not just lie here. Feel the shame that if you do, the dogs could tear his flesh and leave your friend disgraced, defiled in death. Achilles answered back with heavy heart. How could I charge into the battle now, when all my armor's still within their camp? My mother said that she would bring me gear, but only when she's standing by my side she promised Hephaestus' lord of fire would make me bright and shining armor soon. I do not know of any gear to wear, except Ajax's, but he needs it now, for he is near the front lines fighting hard and standing guard beside Patroclus' body. But swift-winged Iris answered him again. We know that you have lost your shining gear, but go without it. Stand beside the trench and show yourself to Troy. They'll run in fear when they see you, and that will give the Greeks a moment to restart their breathing hopes. For though the Greeks are weary, they will find a little break in this relentless fight. When Iris finished, she returned to heaven. But Zeus's friend Achilles stood in place. Then mighty Athena, goddess of wisdom, shrouded Achilles' shoulders in a cloud, and crowned his head with golden streaming light. And from that light a glowing fire rose up, just like the smoke that rises from a town beside the sea, besieged by war and flames, when all day long the townsfolk fight that foe, but light their torches high into the sky so distant neighbors can come to their aid. So from Achilles' head the flames went high. Achilles walked toward the trench and stood, but did not join the battle with the Greeks. He honored his dear mother's wise command, and standing there, he gave a mighty shout. Beside him stood Athena. Loud as ever, her cry stirred terror in the Trojan ranks. Just like a trumpet's strong and mighty blast that rings around a city under siege, so loud and clear Achilles' great voice rose. And when the Trojans heard his bronze-filled cry, their hearts were shaken, filled with sudden fear. Their beautiful maned horses spun around, for knowing deep inside that pains awaited. The drivers froze when they saw endless fire blaze forth above the head of mighty Peleus' son. The flames that glowed were set by bright-eyed Athena. Now, just a little biography of Patrick Shaw. Actually, not even a biography. Just a little context of Patrick Shaw-Stewart, who is, again, like many people in his era, classically trained. So he'd read the Iliad, he'd read the classics. And he was a bit of a poet himself. And he is, as he says in the poem, he is on leave. So he's taking R&R in Imbros, across the sea. And this is the Aegean Sea, the same sea that Achilles would have crossed to get to Troy. So he's in the same historical place, which was ruled by the Ottoman Empire at the time of World War I, but it's the same location. And he makes some remarks about the senselessness of it, which is, to him, he says, "Fatal second Helen, why must I follow thee?" Helen is, to Shaw and to Achilles in the story, a non-reason for fighting, in a sense. Like, why am I fighting for this other person? Achilles famously says, the Trojans never did nothing to me. Why am I fighting them? They never attacked my towns. They never took anything from me. In fact, it's Agamemnon who took from me, not the Trojans. So why am I fighting them? For this Helen person? Helen's not even my wife. It's Menelaus, another Greek king's wife. Why am I here? That's the same thing that Shaw is saying, like, especially with World War I, which was probably one of the most senseless wars in all of history. And, why is he there? He doesn't know. And he says, Achilles came to Troyline, I to Chersonese, which is the same general area. And then he says in the poem, was it so hard, Achilles, so very hard to die? You knew, thou knewest, and I know not, so much the happier I. I find that to be very profound, and it's also a key to understanding the Iliad itself, but also it's something about life that we're learning. So Achilles, unlike any other Greek warrior, any other soldier in history, knew his fate. This is an important part of the Iliad. Achilles is told by his mother, a goddess Thetis, that if he stays in Troy and fights in Troy, he will die, but his glory, his honor, the glory of his name will live forever. But if he goes home, he will live a long, beautiful, wonderful life, have a family and a wife and wonderful things. But he'll die unknown, and no one will ever speak his name again. He knows that. Patrick Shaw-Stewart does not know if he's going to live or die. That is the normal state of warriors, of soldiers. They don't know if a bullet's going to come and get them. They have no clue, of course. But Achilles does. And in that ignorance, he's saying that he's able to have more happiness. He empathizes with Achilles in this morning. And then he says, I will go back this morning from Imbros over the sea, then he says, stand in the trench, Achilles. You know, there's the famous trenches of World War One. Well, they had a famous trench in the Iliad too. And so he's saying, stand in the trench, Achilles, flamed capped, and shout for me. Now, the passage of the Iliad I just read to you, the reason I wanted to read that to you is I wanted you to get a sense of what this, the realness of this war and what it might have felt like if that were to actually happen in a war. So you're going to this place where you may die, where it's lots of casualties. So the total casualties on the Allied side is, I think, around 250,000 people. This is a brutal campaign. And killed around 46,000. So this is a dangerous campaign. And if you imagine, you hear this a lot with Christians where they have their crosses, they have their like champion. And I want a champion. I want someone to champion me so that I can survive through this trial. That's what this basically is. Stand in the trench, Achilles, flame capped, and shout for me. And it's what Achilles does for the Greek soldiers. So the Greek soldiers are being beaten by the Trojans at this moment in the Iliad. And then you have the greatest hero who's been absent from the story from the battle up until now, runs out basically naked with flames coming out of his head, the same flames that you would see above a conquered city, and he shouts and everyone freaks out. The Trojans' horses are terrified. They turn around. The drivers of the chariots flee. Everyone flees. And so it gives a break. It gives a respite. It allows the Trojan or the Greeks to live another day to fight. That's, I think, what Shaw is having here, or wanting. Okay, so now I'm going to read the poem one more time, and this is where we will wrap up. I'm just going to read the poem one more time, and now, knowing what you know, see if it impacts you more. I saw a man this morning who did not wish to die. I ask and cannot answer, if otherwise wish I. Fair broke the day this morning against the Dardanelles. The breeze blew soft, the morn's cheeks were cold as cold seashells. But other shells are waiting across the Aegean Sea, shrapnel and high explosive, shells and hells for me. Oh, hell of ships and cities, hell of men like me, fatal second Helen, why must I follow thee? Achilles came to Troyland, and I to Chersonese. He turned from wrath to battle, and I from 3 days' peace. Was it so hard, Achilles? So very hard to die? Thou knewest, and I know not. So much the happier I will go back this morning from Imbros over the sea. Stand in the trench, Achilles, flame capped, and shout for me. So that is the poem I Saw a Man This Morning by Patrick Shaw-Stewart. Now I wanted to reserve this for the end because when I heard this, it had an even bigger impact on me. And that is that when Patrick Shaw-Stewart returned to battle, he died. He died at the Battle of Gallipoli, just after writing this poem. I think it's one of the reasons why the poem has become famous, but I think also it's a wonderful poem that on its own merits is great, but part of infused into it is the spirit of what this educated, classically trained poet who chose or who went to war after he got educated and he, fought all these battles, and he goes off and he's worried about dying the next day, and he asks for his champion, and his champion, unfortunately does not work for him. And I think whenever I see this poem, I think I saw a man this morning who did not wish to die. I ask and cannot answer, if otherwise wish I. I always think of that as such a multi-tiered thing, that he saw a man, maybe an ally who was going to go back to war with him the next day, who did not wish to die. But I also see Shaw looking in the mirror there. I saw a man this morning who did not wish to die. This is a man who doesn't want to die. And he's dealing with this war that he doesn't understand. He's dealing with a war that doesn't make sense. Just read up a little bit on the World War I. It's one of those wars. Like World War II makes a lot of sense. It's senseless in a sense, but there's real reasons. But it's like battling over this person and that person in this territory. Like it just doesn't. Why did they fight this one? It didn't make sense. And it's brutal and bloody in it, and it's a challenge to, a lot of theories of romanticism that they had over the years. And so he's putting it in these terms, he's trying to deal with it, he's trying to deal with the reality of it, and he comes up with this poem that he doesn't even label. That's why it's called, he doesn't title it, I Saw a Man This Morning. So it's just one of those poems he just wrote down in his diary or something. And he relates his experience to the experience of Achilles, the greatest warrior in history and the greatest warrior in the Trojan War. And of course, we do know that Achilles does die in the Trojan War, just like Shaw will die, unfortunately. So that is this poem. I hope that you read through it a couple times, you enjoy it, and I hope it, makes you want to read the Iliad and the literary canon. So go on over to troubadour.studio. troubadour.studio, and you can sign up and you can learn more about the classics. You can learn more about these kinds of poems. You can get these a modern translation of Julius Caesar and other things that I'm putting together, and to make this more accessible to you. That's my goal. So go over there, troubadour.studio, check it out, and hopefully you enjoyed this reading and exploration of I Saw a Man This Morning by Patrick Shaw-Stewart.